The bitter court battle over a book by Donald Trump's niece, Mary, continues. Earlier, I spoke with Mike Papantonio, a longtime trial attorney and host of America's Lawyer with Mike Papantonio, about this headline-grabbing legal drama. Here's that interview. Do they ever stop publication, Mike?
There are a lot of questions swirling around about the release of Mary Trump's book, and they all are going to depend on what's actually in the non-disclosure agreement that she signed 20 years ago. Mary's lawyers are arguing that the NDA is too broad in scope, and it can't be enforced because of that. This is it's actually an argument that's made by other people who have been bound by NDAs regarding Donald Trump, and those cases were very successful. Her lawyers are claiming that the Trump children lied about their assets in order to secure the estate settlement. And if they entered into an agreement on false pretenses, then the whole thing would be considered null and void. An interesting part about this, there may be what we call, and this is a guess, but there may be what we call liquidated damages involved in this. And what that means is there doesn't have to be a showing of damages. There simply has to be a showing that the contract has been violated, and then that liquidated damage amount falls on Mary Trump. Most of the time, you'll see a publishing company like Simon & Schuster say, look, we will handle liquidated damages. We think we can make enough money on this book that we're going to go forward anyway, and any damages that ensue from there, we'll go ahead and handle that. Daniel Ellsberg is a great example. The Daniel Ellsberg case with the Pentagon Papers. Understand, those papers, they were published, and Daniel Ellsberg was, he was indicted. In the end, he was not prosecuted. So the point is this: Mary Trump is at risk. Simon & Schuster is not at risk. Just like in Daniel Ellsberg case, Ellsberg was at risk, but the publisher was not at risk because they argued First Amendment, and they also argued that this notion of prior restraint on publishing or pre-publication injunction should not be considered by the court, and they were successful. So I think the book comes out, and I think what Mary Trump is going to have to understand is there's ramifications that are going to flow after that.
All right. It's rare that a book is stopped from publication, isn't it?
It's very rare. It's a very fundamental First Amendment right. The court looks at, there may be some issues, but the first issue we're going to look at is are we willing to enjoin a publication, especially a pre-publication? And this judge has said, look, there are already thousands of these books out there. What good is it going to do anyway? I think Simon & Schuster's in good shape. I can't say that Mary Trump is in good shape because we haven't had a chance to look at what that NDA is or whether there's liquidated damages in that NDA.
So at this point, it's impossible to say who's going to win on this?
Well, I think Simon & Schuster is going to win. I think the book is going to be a bestseller. I think it's going to generate a lot of money. And the only question is who wins between the Trump family and Mary Trump. As I said, Mary Trump is saying, look, the reason this thing is null and void, the reason the NDA is null and void is because there was fraud in the disclosure of assets that the Trump family came forward with. And so that's going to be an element they're going to argue. The Trump family is going to obviously argue, you can go forward with this, but your damages are going to be substantial. She simply has to take the risk. Maybe Simon & Schuster will step in to handle the damages that might result here.
Does it make the president look good to be fighting it?
I think it's a big mistake. I think every time Trump steps up and fights something like he did with Bolton, or the publications are going to continue. Look, his base is his base. His base at 40% isn't going to change. They're going to stay there regardless of what he does. But I think people that aren't in his base say, what do you have to hide? I think it's a mistake for him to do that. He doesn't need to do it because ultimately the person seeking that publication is going to prevail. Now, Bolton has another problem. Bolton's issue comes down to there's certain steps that he has to take with the federal government to be able to release certain elements of what's contained in his book. He didn't do that. So you can't compare the Mary Trump case with what happened to Bolton.
Okay, now let's go to some other areas. Authorities arrested Ghislaine Maxwell last week, Jeffrey Epstein's alleged enabler in the sexual abuse case. Donald Trump was a close friend of Mr. Epstein. He was. Right. Do you expect him to come out in the trial of Miss Maxwell, or she'll turn state's evidence, right?
Yeah, I think this is interesting. As the FBI mentioned, Maxwell's been slithering around all over the globe for 12 months since her buddy Jeffrey Epstein was arrested last summer. They finally found her in New Hampshire on this palatial estate that she had purchased with cash from, interestingly enough, a shell company that both Epstein and she had set up. Maxwell's been hit with 6 charges, one being perjury for lying to investigators years ago, and the rest are all related to her acting as a groomer and a recruiter for these young girls that Jeffrey Epstein and his powerful friends abused over the years. An attorney, interesting part of this story, an attorney named Brad Edwards, a spectacular attorney out of South Florida, has been working tirelessly on this case. And this is a big step forward for him in this fight for justice for the Epstein victims. But here's what we know so far. Maxwell has been accused of actively seeking out these young girls all over the world and putting them in Epstein's ring. She would, according to the indictment, this is the way the indictment reads, she acted as a groomer of sorts for these girls, showing them how to perform massages on Epstein and other men. Her presence in the room with the girls, Larry, seemed to put the girls at ease. If you read this indictment, and make them think that everything was okay, that what they were doing was perfectly normal. What Maxwell did to these young girls obviously is deplorable. Here's the interesting part of the case, though. Maxwell is going to say that there was a prosecution agreement that was signed, okay? And it was signed back when Epstein was first prosecuted. Epstein's pals, his political pals, came to his aid and worked out this non-prosecution agreement in 2008. It included a phrase that Maxwell's lawyers are trying to use to protect her from prosecution. It said that not only would Epstein not be prosecuted, but also his co-conspirators would not be prosecuted. Maxwell wasn't explicitly mentioned in that agreement, but it contained a phrase that I think the phrase was not limited to people that were named in the indictment. So virtually anybody, the argument's going to be made that anybody that was surrounding that indictment, anybody that was surrounding the first Epstein problem, that they are absolved from all this. And here's why that argument might not work, and my guess is the argument will not work, because it only pertains to crimes that were committed in Florida. And much like Epstein's arrest last year, new charges emerged that weren't related to Florida, allowing prosecutors to go after him. This is the same kind of problem that they've got. So, the truth is, I don't think this effort by Maxwell has a chance because there's so many problems with that non-prosecution agreement. The judge was totally dysfunctional. Absolutely dysfunctional where it came to his job. The prosecutors were dysfunctional. They didn't do their job. The victims in that case under Florida law should have had the right to know what was going to happen in the pleading, in the deal that was made. They weren't made aware of that. The law in Florida is very specific about that. The chances of her winning on this little glitch, I think, is almost non-existent, but that's what you're going to hear about a lot, that she's been absolved in all this because she's protected under that non-prosecution agreement.
Mike, you're always on the mark. It's always great having you with us.
Thank you, Larry.